recording.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate it. So when I was talking with your organization about what kinds of topics, I kind of gave like a whole bunch, and they said, hey, that one sounds great. And that sounds like it would be of interest to all kinds of people. So we are going to talk about dealing with tough stakeholders tonight. So let's first define a stakeholder really quick. Not to put you on the spot, if you want to go ahead and answer this in the chat, I'll watch the chat, but a stakeholder is what, in your opinion? How would you define a stakeholder? Anybody have any ideas? I am sharing my screen, right? I just want to make sure.
Yes, we can see your screen. So to me, a stakeholder is somebody who is going to have a say and leverage in a decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be anybody, right? So, oh, and I love that, Maggie. Someone who is invested in the outcome of a project or decision. Yes, absolutely. The thing about it is that not all stakeholders want to work well with you. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about why some stakeholders are tough. We're going to talk about a model for thinking about how we interact with people at work, including those tough stakeholders. And then I'm going to share with you some methods that I have for working with tough stakeholders so that things can go a lot more smoothly in your workplace. If you feel like you want to ask a question, feel free to pop it in. We're actually going to answer most of them at the end. But if you're like, oh my God, I got to know this now, no worries. I am totally open to being interrupted. Just come off mute and let me know. I had such a great introduction, but just really quick about me. So I run a UX agency. So UX is user experience. We do strategy research. I have been doing UX since before it was called UX. Like to say when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I do have a master's in UX. I eat, sleep, and breathe it, essentially, is what it comes down to. So I can really geek out about these kinds of things and anything related to UX. So if I'm getting where I'm not answering a question that you have because I'm talking in jargon, tell me to stop. And a little Standard Beagle, we do lots of different projects. So we do work in B2B SaaS and health tech, but we'll also work with nonprofits. I do a lot of usability studies for in like the legal space with media. I'm working right now on a project with a giant, like it's a I don't know how to describe them. They do like IT management software. So it do all kinds of cool projects from large to small and back in the between. So I've had a lot of experience dealing with stakeholders in every single project that I've worked on because I've worked with so many different clients. They all bring their own stakeholders. And sometimes there's stakeholders that are from different places, right? It's not just the company that I'm working with, but it could be a vendor that comes along with them. And usually when you're dealing with a stakeholder and they say something that you're like, what? You kind of like, what is happening? Why is this going on? Hopefully that's not always the case, but a lot of times it can be very confusing. And when things start to go awry with our stakeholders, what tends to happen is that projects start to kind of slip. They're going in a direction that you may not really want them to go in. And then when that happens, generally we've got mud in our face. We're having to deal with a lot of the negative outcomes that come with a failed project, or that's probably the worst thing that happens. But just dealing with like the after effects of it can be really tough. So anytime we can deal with avoiding that tough stakeholder, it kind of behooves us to do that. And honestly, I've had this happen so many times. And so I wanted to tell you a story about what happened with me in this. I'm changing his name to Fred to, for his own privacy. It happened a couple of years ago. So Fred was a stakeholder on a project that we were working on for a big technology company. The project was to come in and do interviews with stakeholders, with users, to find out some specific benchmarks and make recommendations on how to make the software better. And Fred was kind of new in his role. He wasn't the top person on the team. So we're not talking about someone who is a president or a vice president or anything like that. He's kind of a middle manager director. And then there were other people that kind of fell and looked to him. Um, Things started off great with Fred, honestly. He seemed very engaged. He was talking during the projects, but things kind of started to go off track. And what I noticed about maybe a third to halfway through the project, all of a sudden, Fred was not as nice as he was before. So he was staying off camera during meetings. We had at least one meeting every week with him. And then I also noticed that he was starting to get real micromanagey about the project. He wanted to see the spreadsheet where we were keeping the names of the users that we were recruiting and qualifying. He wanted to see like the details, which that's not normal for a stakeholder. And then when we were in meetings and I was presenting some initial findings or going through the logistics, he was trying to, he was basically calling me out. And well, what are you sure that that's the way that it's going? Like he was very much trying to trip me up in meetings. And at the very end of the project, there was absolutely no positive feedback from him. He definitely was very, very cold to us at the end, to the point where the team that I was working with, we all got together after we were like, well, maybe we salvage this project because it was rough. The thing is that as I was reflecting afterward, because you kind of go through the stages of grief, right? You're like, at first you're like, that guy was a jerk. I don't want to deal with a jerk. But then you start to kind of accept that that's the way that things went. And I was reflecting, why why did it go this way? Why did I miss these signs of trouble? Because I cataloged everything out as to how it went so that I could figure out how it might not happen again. And what I realized is that if I think about the way he was acting, it was similar to other tough stakeholders that I had had along in my career. So some of the things I've noticed about all stakeholders that I've worked with is that first of all, they get really critical. They might start off as critical. And in fact, most of the time I've noticed that they start off in the entire project, they are really negative. And what happens is that negativity is really toxic and it spreads to other people on the team. And it becomes very hard to be the person that is excited and is positive and is trying to bring everybody together, because that one person can really sour everybody else. Another thing that I've noticed about people is that it seems like they weren't bought in from the very beginning. Like they didn't want the project to happen at all. And so they start saying negative things, but then they also are just really bad at communicating. If they show up to a meeting, they don't know how to say what they mean. But sometimes they're just not saying anything at all in between meetings, or they're not communicating. And then the third thing I've noticed is something that I just mentioned, is that it sours everybody else. They have so much influence as a stakeholder that what they do is they start to get everybody else off track, to turn their attention away from the whole project, because they don't have to have authority in the organization to do it. They just need to have influence. So there's two different things going on here. So I I was really mulling over, like, why do people act like this? What's behind all that? Like it can't just have happened, right? There has to be something that is kind of deep down underneath with these stakeholders. So is there a way that we can root that out to kind of help guide that process, especially at the very beginning of a project? And I read this amazing book, and it talks about the dynamics of the human brain. And there are 5 things that every human needs. And if we have it or if we don't have it, fires off different things in our brain. the lack of some of these things actually fires with what's called our limbic system. It's that system that when you get angry, you know, when you kind of get fuzzy headed and all you can focus on is the anger, that's the limbic system at work. And it takes a while to clear that. And so, in order to keep ourselves in our logical thinking brain, we need to have these 5 things: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Those are the 5 things. And I know that kind of you've probably heard about the need for like shelter and water. That's all separate. That's physical. We're talking about the emotional safety that comes with our cognitive self. And when it comes to stakeholders, there are three of these things are most essential: the status, the certainty, and the relatedness. Those are the things. So this is the SCARF model here. So you can remember it by the acronym SCARF. So let's talk about status first, because I'm going to focus just on those 3. So status is really a very primary thing that we think about. We're not even aware when we're feeling it. But if we feel like our status is high, our brain rewards us with this feeling of like good feelings. We're staying focused. Nothing's threatening us. But if we feel like our status is threatened, that fires off that limbic response. And what we can feel is, first of all, if we can feel social pain. So if we feel like, oh, we don't have friends, people don't want to be around us, we feel this sense of rejection and this exclusion, and it actually impacts the same regions of the brain as pain. And so this is a very, I hate to say it, but it's kind of primal. And so we're always looking and judging ourselves against each other based on status. So if I feel like I'm in a room and I'm lower than other people in terms of status, I'm going to feel more threatened. I'm going to close in. I'm going to feel like I'm defending myself. Whereas if I'm very comfortable, I feel like my status is high. I feel on top of the world. I don't feel like I need to like react or act out. Certainty is another thing. And again, the lack of certainty fires off this threat feeling, this kind of threat response, because humans crave certainty over chance. And this has been proven again and again in psychology studies, especially if you read the book by Daniel Kahneman and his partner on Thinking Fast and Slow. It's this feeling of uncertainty about the future that makes us act in certain ways. And so if we feel like we don't know what's going to happen, we're going to react in a way that tries to defend ourselves. And we might react like act out, or we might feel negative towards someone else. And if you think about your own situations, whenever you have felt uncertain about a situation, how did that make you feel? Did you feel great about it? I know I've talked with a lot of designers recently who've been laid off from their jobs, or they think the layoff is coming and they're acting in a way that is very negative because of that feeling of uncertainty. It's natural. So, certainty. And then finally, relatedness. So, when we feel like we relate to other people, we feel rewarded. Our brain rewards us with this lovely flush of whatever it is that it does up there. But when we feel like we're not relating, there's a disconnect from other people. We pull back. We may not act in anger, but we certainly don't act in a positive way. So if you think about when you were growing up in elementary school and how you felt like maybe you didn't relate to a group of children that was in your class, and maybe you felt like kind of resentful toward them, or like, why are they acting like that? Or we start to form like our own like stereotypes about other groups because we don't relate to them. That's the threat response of the lack of relatedness. So when we think about these 3 things and how we as humans act normally, this is where bringing that to our stakeholder comes. Okay. So, oh, here's that book that I mentioned, Your Brain at Work by Dr. David Rock. Excellent book, so much more in the book. But when we are interacting with stakeholders, these things are at work. in our brain. So if we're aware of them, that helps us with our response and how we can manage those stakeholders. So when we think about either a stakeholder might have this issue with status or certainty or relatedness, how can we make sure that they are feeling not the threat side, but the reward side of each of those things? So here's a great quote from the book. Many great leaders understand intuitively that they need to work hard to create a sense of safety in others. So it's that safety that's kind of that code word for all of those things. Feeling safe makes us feel like we want to work more with other people. And if you think about the best bosses you've ever had or the best teachers you've had and the environments that you've been in, those people are working hard to make you feel safe. It just fires our creative juices. But without it, we can't work in a way that is intuitive, that is connected with others. So let's talk about the importance of status. How do we make people feel that higher sense of status? So first of all, one thing we could do is by publicly recognizing them and maybe just thanking them. So when I took sales training, we called this giving someone a stroke. It doesn't have to be flattery, and it shouldn't be. You shouldn't ever be inauthentic, but acknowledging someone else that they did something like, oh, thanks for the question. That's a stroke. Or, hey, I noticed that, you were taking notes. I really appreciate that. Or just saying, I appreciate the um, the, the engagement with me, or I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. All of those things are strokes, and all of those things can help with publicly recognizing another person and making them feel that sense of reward. It can actually resonate for a long time. Even those silly, well, I call them silly, but they're not, even little certificates. When you say thank you for your work, that can go a long way. Now, we're not going to give a stakeholder certificate likely, but by recognizing maybe their role in the project, that they brought the team together, that they're participating in the meeting, that's a way of publicly recognizing them and making them feel appreciated. Now, we also want to make sure that we're keeping everybody feeling safe, that there's a certainty of something like being done at the end, right? Like they want to know where things are going. So one of the things you can do is by being transparent about the status of a project or in where information is being held so that they know what the next step is. So one of the things you can do is just put an agenda in front of people. I know that I struggled with this for so many years because I'm just so bad at like thinking ahead like that. That's just not my MO. But I realized that I need to do an agenda because it makes people feel certain of what we're going to be talking about and what's next. Or just giving them a project status, like we're here right now, and next week we're going to be doing this. That puts people's minds at ease. It gives them that sense of certainty to help make them feel like, okay, things are good. I don't have to worry. We're on track. And even if things aren't going well, even if the project is going a little off track or maybe something happened, just by being in front of people about it and saying, this is what's happening, this is how we're dealing with it, this is what we expect to happen as a result, just by bringing it up helps people feel more comfortable and more certain about where things are going. And then relatedness. Nobody likes to feel left out. Everybody wants to be part of the team. So if you pull together a team, everybody should feel like they're part of that team and not feel like it's splintering off into like, this group of people is doing their thing and these people are doing their thing. I hate politics at work. I hate it so much. Sometimes we have to deal with it, right? But when you're in a team, if you don't relate to everybody on the team, you're not getting work done. And a stakeholder that has some negative feelings, they're more likely to want to try to pull people from your team over to their side so that they have another, like a buddy or two that they can relate to. This is how that toxicity spreads through the team, is because that one person doesn't want to feel alone. So, what you can do is help people feel connected, bring them together in a room. As much as I love the convenience of online meetings and the fact that we can easily do whiteboards and share slides and record, there's just something about being together and in person that does help with that. Now, that being said, we all can't do that all the time. What do you do with a remote team? Well, allow time for casual conversation in the beginning of the meeting. Don't just jump right to it. How are your kids? Or what's the weather like? I think just recently I was in a meeting with a client, and the client's in Edinburgh, and they were talking about how cold it was. And then someone was like, oh, well, Cindy's in Texas, and what's the temperature there, right? Like we're just bantering back and forth. And I think at one point we talked about how the 80s are coming back with the young kids and Gen Alpha, right? So like that kind of stuff makes people start to feel connected as a team. And that helps a lot, especially when you don't know a lot of people. All right. Does anybody have any questions? I can't see my chat at all. Anyone have any questions before I move on to the methods? Okay. So first of all, we need to manage status. And this is the one that it gets a little dicey, right? Because we don't want to hurt our own status in order to make someone else's status higher. So I want to kind of frame that. So one thing I noticed about Fred, if we go back to my friend Fred here, is that I really think that he felt that his status was threatened. He felt that somehow I made him feel less than, and maybe he, took an affront to me jumping in on a question, or maybe I didn't do something in a method that he thought was the right way for recruitment. I'm not sure, but somehow he felt this way, and I probably need to be way more um, careful about how I managed him, and not just assuming that like he was all of a sudden my bud. I probably needed to take extra steps. So that's the first lesson, right? Is to be aware of hierarchy. He was at a director level. He didn't see me as his equal, even though I thought I was probably, his equal, because that's how I roll. Status is absolutely relative. So people see themselves and they judge themselves in relation to the people that they connect with. And so you can feel reward by increasing someone's status, but you can also you make someone feel less than if they feel like their status has gone down below you. So when you're working in an environment with teams, always be aware of the pecking order. So what is that corporate hierarchy that's going on? Um, I think at a director level, right, there's all these other people that are like, going up to this person, and you've got to figure out where you sit in that mix and how do you refer to that person. I mentioned strokes earlier. Strokes. Oh, let me go to your question because it's probably related. Is it Ramuka?
Yeah, Renuka. Hi,
Yeah.
Cindy.
Hi.
A quick question on the hierarchy because sharing my personal experience, a lot of the times whenever I'm in a new setup or a new environment in a meeting, I feel more comfortable when I'm unaware of what their status is or what the hierarchy is. So if they're higher up in the level, whenever I get to know that, I have that mental block, right? That this person is at this level or this status. And I feel like sometimes not knowing that has been really helpful. So how do we really manage that by knowing it, being aware of it, but not blocking our ability to speak in front of them, because sometimes that comes in between.
Have you ever felt like someone felt like you threatened their status as a result of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's a really good question. Um, I think that's probably something you need to work through, because I definitely understand the block that you're feeling, because you're like, oh my God, I'm with the CEO and how are they gonna, I can totally understand that. Um, but you should definitely give a deference, right? There's always a level of respect. So even if you don't know, maybe look at how you're speaking to them. Maybe just always go ahead and like assume that you have to give a certain level of respect. But I think it's going to depend a lot on the environment, and it's going to depend on the culture that you're dealing with, because every culture is different. I I'll have to think on like the best way to do it if you're completely unaware. Maybe just be aware that because you're unaware, you're at a disadvantage. And then you have to give respect to everybody in the room. But I caution you not to give up your own sense of autonomy, and not to give so much status to other people that you shrink away. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, it does. And that's what I've noticed. And I completely agree with you. There's that level of respect always, but then there's that block comes in between when I have that awareness of having certain person at like higher status.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And honestly, it's so weird. So, and again, the sales training, we always talk about the pendulum effect, right? So the pendulum effect is that wherever the customer is and how they're feeling, the salesperson always wants to be just behind them. So if we think of like a line here, and on one end they're like so anti, like negative, right? And on the other end, they're like really positive and like, oh my God, let's do it all together, right? So wherever that pendulum is swinging in between those two, the salesperson or anybody, I think, needs to be kind of right behind them. You don't want to be more enthusiastic if they're way up here. You want to be just just backed off a little bit. And the same thing, right? Like if they're super negative, well, hopefully they're not super negative, but if they're more on the negative side, you want to somehow like be behind them. You don't want to be like overly aggressive and positive. You want to dial it back with them. So if you think about their demeanor and maybe just pull it back just a little bit from them, that also sets status as well, because you're not happier than they are, you're not more enthusiastic than they are. So their position is still assured because they're still ahead of you on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also, people, it's all true. It's so true with everybody that I've dealt with. People always want to judge themselves like, well, that person can't be good. I'm better than them, right? We always do that to other people. So if you could just be just a little bit less perfect, because come on, Ramuka, you're perfect, right? I mean, be a little bit less perfect, people are more likely to think better of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. All right. So strokes, love strokes. And you don't have to be like, that was a brilliant question. That was a brilliant, you don't have to be like that. Just be like, hey, I appreciate the question. It might be the stupidest question that you've ever gotten, but at least you're giving us like some acknowledgement that they asked it and you heard it. Another thing you can do is you can tell what's called a third party story. So there's something about telling someone to do something that makes people mad. I don't know about you, but I hate being told what to do. I'm an adult, right? I don't like being scolded. One time recently, I was walking down my street and I wanted to cross. It was a huge road, but like a little bit larger road. And I stepped out and I realized that this car was going to turn, and I stopped. He pulled up, and dude rolled down his window to tell me that I shouldn't be stepping out into traffic. Man, I was mad. That is just the rudest thing you can do, right? I probably would have been more open to his feedback had he used a third party story. And what this is when you tell a story that's from someone else and it's roughly in the same area, but it's something that they did and it worked for them. And it kind of gives the hint to this other person that this might work for them. So you might say, well, instead of saying, well, you should do the project this way, you should put reviews on your homepage and you should make sure that you are following all these steps. Instead, you can go, my friend so and so had this kind of story on their website, and what they ended up doing after this is blah 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 blah. one, that third party story takes it away from you. You're no longer scolding them. And two, it makes them kind of sees like some social proof. Well, hey, this worked for somebody else. Maybe I'll give it a try. So you're not threatening their status by telling them what to do. You're sharing a story from someone else. Take it or leave it. They can decide how they want to take that information and use it. Now, this one's a tough one. Asking questions to help them feel like it was their idea. This is it's really key. I don't want you to give up your authority. I don't want you to give up any kind of status. But sometimes people have to kind of be pushed in the direction, and sometimes it's not important for you to take all the credit for everything. So use this carefully. But what you might do if you're getting someone that's like really stuck and they have to make all the decisions is to kind of lead them that way by asking questions so that they think of it themselves. This works really good with my teenagers. They never think that I'm right, like ever. And for me, it's not important to be right. I just want them to go in the right direction. So eventually they'll come around and they'll think like, oh, studying, I should totally study. And not because I told them to study, but because I asked them, how's it going at school? How are those applications to college going? What did your teachers tell you, right? Like those kinds of things kind of lead them to figure it out for themselves. That's kind of the idea here. But again, you don't want people to steal your ideas. If it's important that you share the idea generation, be careful not to let somebody else take all the credit for all the ideas. Does that make sense? It's a fine line here, so be careful with this one. And then I think this is the last one, is getting uncomfortable intentionally. There's something about other people feeling a little bit uncomfortable that makes the person with them feel higher in status. So there's this story that I heard about this sales guy. He was the most successful sales guy. He got so many sales. But when he would go into a meeting with the potential customer, he always had lost his pen. Like he was like, oh, I can't find my pen. I can't find my pen. The customer sitting across with him was like, wow, this idiot doesn't have a pen. Like, what is wrong with this guy? It wasn't so much that he looked like a fool, but it was just enough to get a little uncomfortable to make the status of the person with them go up a little bit. So it's kind of that pendulum effect, right? I'm not perfect. I'm authentic, but I'm kind of like you. But again, not perfect. So people feel like, oh, okay, this person isn't trying to threaten me. So this is something where getting uncomfortable a little bit, not doing things always the right way every time. So this kind of comes back to what you asked about, Ramuka, because you were saying that you were feeling blocked and you were getting really nervous when people are in the room. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that's your secret weapon to actually developing status in other people, because they're like, wow, this person's like really nervous around me. You don't want to be so nervous that you get absolutely stopped and you can't talk anymore, but tripping up over words and like that is okay. It actually makes people go like feel more related to you. Something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we've gone through status, which I think is one of the harder ones, we'll talk about managing certainty and relatedness. And even status falls into this. So with Fred, like I know that he was lacking certainty and relatedness based on the way he was acting. And what I thought about is that he felt uncomfortable because the project wasn't going the way he thought it would. So what happened partway through the project is that our findings in the user interviews were not exactly online with what he was thinking we were going to deliver. We actually found some extra stuff. And so that lack of certainty, that really threw him like for a loop. And so the other thing was that I'm a stranger. I was a vendor working with his company. He didn't know me from Adam. And so I am an unknown quantity here. I'm the risky one. And so he didn't There was a lack of relatedness. There was a lack of certainty about my abilities. So all of that kind of worked like against me in terms of the SCARF model. So one of the things I wish I'd been able to do, and what I've tried to do moving forward with clients, is do what's called a vision meeting. This is where you're all getting together at the beginning of the project and getting everybody on the same page. So what happens with this type of meeting is that you're fostering certainty because everybody gets together, and by the end of the meeting, you have a clear, like, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and this is the timeline. So it provides a big picture, so the certainty is there. You're also all together working on this, so you're fostering a sense of team and relatedness. And then everybody gets to contribute ideas. So instead of this one person that's kind of off to the side and they don't want to participate, they're in it. And because they're participating, we're acknowledging their ideas, we're building status. So it helps with all of those things. The other thing it does is that it kind of equalizes the voices, right? Because when you have a stakeholder that is overly negative, they tend to have a big voice. And so what you want to do is make sure that everybody feels equal, everybody's able to have that same authority, and that person that's getting negative, he starts to be influenced by the positive voices because all of them are equalized. So we also end up getting this kind of reverse influence effect happening. And if you do it right, and if like the stars align, you end up getting them to kind of turn around and get buy-in. So some of the things that happen here that come into this vision meeting is that you want to make sure that everybody who is a key party, key stakeholder here is involved. That might be tough to get everybody together, but it is important. So you don't want people left out. You also are planning for this. There's going to be structured exercises that you have people walk through. So you don't want to just wing this. This is not a random brainstorming in a conference room kind of meeting. So as a result of that, you want to make sure that either if you're running it, that you are a strong facilitator, and if you're not, that you find someone who is. They need to keep the group on task. And then there's also, you're going to be working together and there's going to be talking, but you're also going to be working silently together at times. That's where the equalization comes in. That's how we do it. So here's a picture from a vision meeting that I did. This is pre-COVID. We got pulled in with Central Health. They're the Travis County Health District, and they wanted to do a new website. They have a big marketing team. They're taxpayer funded. So, and we were working through another agency. So there was lots of stakeholders involved. And I knew that because they didn't know us, that we needed to get everybody on the same page because we had some very strong voices in the room, especially if you can see my mouse. This guy is the marketing director, and he still is. And he can be kind of scary at times. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew exactly what we were doing. So we went through the vision meeting and we ended up asking like 3 or 4 questions. They did this whiteboard exercise together, and it worked. And I know it worked because when I delivered my findings from the research, they had to take it in front of their board, which is a community-based board with a very intense group of people who were on this board. And I got called up to answer questions about it. And I got put through the ringer. And I tell you what, this team right here, they jumped in and defended me. And I know that they defended me because that meeting right there is exactly what helped build us as a team. So the importance of that vision meeting is that it can lead to a lot more good relationships down the road. In fact, I just finished another project with them, got in a room with them, presented my results. It felt like we were old time friends. So it goes on and on forever. So the way that we did this meeting and the way that I've done them since is we got all the key parties together. Sometimes there's a lot of people. You don't want too many. 12, more than 12 is too many. You also want to make sure that at some point during the meeting, usually at the very beginning, you are working on building rapport. So you might have some icebreaker questions, and then you're going to be doing the structured exercises. And then you also want to make sure that you have a whiteboard, digital or physical, at your disposal so that you can do these exercises silently together and have a facilitator walk everybody through. It's simple, it's inexpensive, it involves the whole team. It works both the analytical and the creative parts of our brain. It makes work visible, so people really like to see the work in front of them. And we're also promoting that critical thinking. So here's an example of some whiteboard like structuring exercises. It's kind of fun to get messy together. Big thing here is making sure that that facilitator is chosen. You need to have someone who is a strong but calm presence. They need to be able to listen, and they need to be able to stay objective. So you don't want someone that's judging the ideas that are going up on the whiteboard. You need to make sure you have enough time. A 30-minute or even sometimes a 1-hour meeting is not enough time at all. So that one was a full like half-day meeting. So you just kind of play it by ear. You're probably going to need at least an hour and a half, if not more. And then, like I said, invite up to 12 people. If you get any more, it becomes very hard to manage that number of people. Make sure that everybody's can be in that place, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, or it's in a conference room. You don't want people, you want people like in an office too, that's quiet. You don't want them off like trying to do it from their vacation on a beach or something like that. So make sure that it's a quiet place and make sure that you're setting the agenda ahead of time about how people are expected to behave in the meeting, to say, hey, cell phones away, we'll take some breaks for water and snacks and bathroom breaks. And this is what we're going to be going through. So the facilitator really needs to make sure that they set the tone here. Honestly, I mean, I think we've all become so accustomed to remote meetings that you could go either way, either in person or remote. If you're working in person, make sure that you reserve enough time for that conference room. That there aren't a whole bunch of people walking by, although that might work to your benefit. You never know. You got to have a large space where you can put the sticky notes. A whiteboard is ideal, but if you just have a blank wall, that works too. I usually have a watch and a notepad, and then I bring lots and lots of sticky notes and Sharpies. Love sticky notes and Sharpies. I have them everywhere at my office. And the reason you use a Sharpie is if someone writes something on a sticky note and puts it up on the board, you want someone across the room to be able to see that sticky note. So that's why you don't use a ballpoint pen. And then I always bring dot stickers with me, and the dot stickers are for voting. So you can vote on the ideas and get everybody kind of narrowed down into that, like, here's the direction we're going, or this is the idea that we're going after. If you're using a remote situation, so you'll want to make sure that everybody has that meeting link ahead of time. So in that calendar invite, make sure that you think about how to adjust the timing. So if we're all in a room together, you know, it becomes natural, we just take a break, but you just can't go for that long on a Zoom meeting. So more than an hour is just too much. So break it into chunks, make sure everybody knows. And if you expect this is going to be a very long, like half day to a day thing, absolutely break that up. Break that up into maybe over 2 days. People just can't handle it. It's exhausting. And then use a remote collaboration tool. Zoom now has its whiteboards, which I haven't used, but people say are great. I personally love using FigJam because it makes things fun, or Mural. But there's so many tools out there that you can use. So once you get everybody in the room, make sure that you set the ground rules, have them put their phones away, or say if they need to take a call, step out, you don't want to see the phone. That's what I did in some of my business coaching meetings. And then get right down to work and making sure that you're building rapport. I like, if you can, bring healthy snacks. We're not talking about potato chips and stuff. We're talking about granola bars and fruit, something that keeps people energized, right? And then, what you're trying to do is make people feel safe. Remember, safety is the big thing here. So make sure that you're telling people, here's my expectation for how we're going to interact with each other. We are going to show respect. There's no dumb ideas. And tell people what you're going to do with the data. Tell people what the outcome is. Don't leave it kind of them guessing why they're there. And then ask them, like, how, after this meeting, how do you want me to follow up with you about the results? How do you want me to handle getting you this information? And then go into an icebreaker. So you can go online and you can find a gajillion icebreaker questions. We do this with my team all the time. We'll just say, like, what was your first dog's name? And what was your, what was something about like your favorite ice cream and why it's your favorite ice cream? Just something simple, something that everybody can share about, and there's absolutely no judgment. And you'll feel closer to people because you are getting just a little bit personal, but not too close and personal. So when you're running the exercises, first of all, you want to start with a question that you put in front of everybody. So what is that question? So it could be like, how might we collect data from our users about their first time experience? We don't really know. So, but just whatever that question is, okay? Then the next thing you want to do is make sure that everybody has sticky notes. I don't even have any in front of me. Sticky notes, and have people spend some time writing one idea per sticky note. And the more ideas, the better. So just have them get it out. Spend like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just coming up with ideas for it. Then after a little bit of time, tell everybody, okay, pencils down, and then they need to go and put their sticky notes up on the whiteboard. Again, this isn't like nobody's judging as things are going up. They're just putting them up on the board. So you're collecting all of them on that board. Now, what I like to do after this is I like to have the group organize their ideas into groups. Maybe pull like 2 people out and have them go through the board and move the ideas and the sticky notes into similarities. So some people might have the same idea, put them together, but let them decide what that organization should be. So if we think about the picture that I showed you of everybody standing in front of that whiteboard, they were all doing it together silently. They were all moving sticky notes. Oh, I think this should go here. And then somebody else might say, no, I think it should go here. And it was very amicable, extremely amicable. And then what you want to do is once they get into groups, have them label those groups, put a name on it, just so that they can see it. So just some sort of label above. And I already went through that. So you can kind of see in the picture here, it's kind of hard to see, but it says category. So they're going to be putting their categories around their groups. Now, once you've got everybody kind of got all their ideas on the board, everybody's felt heard, but now you have to narrow it down. You can't go do all these ideas. So what you can do is you can get everybody who's in the room voting on it. Everybody gets dots. Give them more than 1 dot, somewhere between 2 and 5 dots per person. They can put all of their dots on one sticker. They can spread them out amongst, the number of dots that they have. So if they have 5, they could put it on 5 different ideas. It's the number of dots really kind of depends on the number of ideas on the board, and you're going for more. So you can see in this picture that I have from a session that I did, we have a couple of dots on this one. We have 3 dots on this one. So the one that had the most, that was the one we were really focused on. And you do that same process for each question and narrow it down and narrow it down. You probably are not going to have more than, it depends on how many questions, but if you're doing it in a 2 to 3 hours, you might have like, 3, 4 questions. Kind of depends on the people in the room. So here's some pictures from the one I did with the central health team. So I wanted them to focus on why were we doing this website? Who were we focused on? So they ended up really focusing on patients. So you can see there's a few different people that they have here. They've got patients and residents and advocates. These are all different types of users that they identified. But they focused on that they wanted to focus the website on patients. So here's another one that we did as a team. So that we did this internally where we pulled everybody together and we sorted our ideas. And here's another one. This was one I did with a client. They had a ton of ideas for all the things that they wanted in their project. and we had to narrow it down because you don't have enough time to do it all. So I had to have them focus on what they wanted. And here's another one. Oh, that's a repeat. So why do these things build alignment? So first of all, everybody's voice is being heard at the beginning. Even if that stakeholder doesn't come back until the end presentation, that's okay. They felt heard at the very beginning. So they might not feel like they need to be involved anymore because they were part of the initial part. You are also modeling positive behavior. So because everybody is in there and they're part of it and they're enthusiastic, that one person that's feeling negative, they have less power in order to give that influence of negativity. And they kind of want to go, they want to be relatable. So they kind of go along with the flow. And that positivity is infectious as much as negativity is. Also, the thing that you're going for here isn't agreement, you're getting to commitment. So just because my idea wasn't chosen, I was heard. So I'm committed to the thing that everybody else wants to do. I'm not worried about agreement. So that's what you're going for. So don't try to get everybody to agree, just try to get everybody to commit. And we've asked the stakeholders to contribute, so it increases their feeling of status. They understand what the big picture is. They understand where the project's going, so they have more certainty. And then also, you get to spend some fun time with other people, so they feel related to the team. This is one of my favorite quotes. The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding, from Leonardo DiCaprio. Oh my God, Leonardo da Vinci. So this is what we talked about today. We talked about why stakeholders are so tough. We talked about the SCARF model and what it means. And we talked about some different methods for working with stakeholders so that we can help them feel safe and we can hopefully avoid negative project outcomes. Does anyone have any questions? Ooh, I'm good with my timing. I've got to put on my glasses if there's any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I don't think we have any new questions, but if anyone wants to unmute and ask something, feel free.
I have, I mean, I will come up with a question about the presentation. I just have a random question out of the presentation. So why did you choose bagel or bagel? Well, the name of the name of the brand.
It's an inside joke.
Okay.
But I'll explain the joke. So my husband and I started Standard Beagle, and a long time ago, when we lived in Nashville, we had a treeing Walker coonhound, and she looked like a giant beagle. And people would stop us in the street and they go, "Is that a beagle?" And we'd say, "Oh, she's a Standard Beagle," like the standard poodle, because she was so big. So that was kind of our name. So when we were naming our agency, we were rebranding, and we were trying to figure out, like, well, that's a good name that's unique to us. And my husband ran into the office and he said, "Standard Beagle." And I was like, "What?" And he points at the dog. And I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah. And that was an easy domain name to buy. So.
And it's great because I mean you can use you're using the dog's image as a companion, and it is super. I mean it is catchy, the name, and it is amazing having seen the dog during the presentation. Like, okay, he's with us, so it's super cool.
Yeah.
Question about I think that the information was absolutely great. We are part of a group that works in meetings and public speaking, and also like meetings. So I think many of the things that you said highly resonate with what we are doing, because starting with what you say about having the agenda gives certainty. So I think that's great. So my question goes on what happened with those stakeholders are negative because they are negative and they are like toxic people that you really can't do anything. I mean, you can try to win them over and try to have all these techniques, but how and where we can say this is a stakeholder that it's better not to be related with.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the thing to think is, first of all, you've got to somehow minimize their influence. So you don't want them to affect the other people on the team and get other people feeling negative about it. So somehow you have to figure out how to minimize that without making them feel excluded. And that's a really tough, first of all, that's just a tough thing. So sometimes you're not going to win in those kinds of situations. But if you can minimize that and maybe kind of keep them up to date without having them constantly in the project, I think that's the thing. You definitely want them to stay in touch with the project so that they feel like their ideas are being heard. Because otherwise they could totally torpedo everything, right? And so you really need to figure out what's that balance of keeping that person informed without driving everybody else nuts and hurting it. Because you will get those terrible stakeholders that just ruin everything. I worked on a project with same agency actually. We were doing a website for one of the Texas A&M schools, and they had done a whole new logo, and the website was gorgeous, and everybody had approved it. And the dean came in, or the chancellor, I want to say, and he was like, "Nope, you're not going to change the logo." And that was it. We just had to change a ton as a result of that. And so what you want to avoid is them coming in at the end and trying to change a whole lot of stuff, which is going to hurt everybody. So you want to make sure that you're getting their involvement without harming the project.
Yeah. And finding a balance. Thank you.
Just wanted to add to what you were saying, Cindy. So we have had the similar situations in some of the projects that I have worked on. And I think in those situations, like you mentioned, identifying that ownership, or we use the RACI model, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted. I think having that structure out there was really helpful, so that we are not excluding anyone. We are still keeping that inclusive model, but we have had that levels of ownership. So I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, Cindy, thanks so much for your time this evening. I just so appreciate you being willing to share your experience and give us so many good stories and examples that we can really take with us. So yeah, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you all for having me.
Well, I will go ahead and stop the recording.